Speaking Spanish outside. I need proof of citizenship. Now.
I was born in this city. I served this country for 20 years. You have no right to detain me.
Failure to comply. Hands behind your back.
My name is Arthur Bennett, U.S. Army veteran, and you're about to make a historic mistake.
Arthur Bennett had served his country for 20 years in the U.S. Army, earning a Bronze Star in the jungles of Vietnam and a Purple Heart for the shrapnel that still ached in his left leg on cold mornings. At 72 years old, he thought his fighting days were long over. He was wrong. His final battle wouldn't be fought in a foreign land, but in the quiet, sterile waiting room of his local community health clinic. It was a battle that would expose a rot deep within federal law enforcement and ultimately cost the U.S. government $6.1 million. The man who started it all, a 35-year-old ICE officer named Kevin Maxwell, was convinced he was a patriot, a protector of the border. By the time he was done, he had destroyed his own career and brought shame upon his agency by handcuffing a decorated American hero for the crime of being a black man who spoke Spanish. Before we get into this, where are you tuning in from? If you believe in justice for our veterans, do me a solid and hit that like button. We need to get this story out there. The Harborview Community Health Center in Charleston, South Carolina is not a fancy place. The paint is a little faded. The chairs in the waiting room have seen better days, and the air always carries the faint, clean scent of antiseptic. But for its patients, mostly working-class folks, retirees on fixed incomes, and a significant number of veterans, it's a sanctuary. It's a place of healing and trust. It was just after 10 a.m. on a bright Tuesday in May. The morning sun streamed through the large windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Arthur Bennett sat patiently waiting for his physical therapy appointment. He'd been coming to Harborview twice a week for 3 years to work on the stiffness in his leg, a stubborn souvenir from the Tet Offensive. He was a pillar of his community, a deacon at his church, a grandfather who taught his grandkids how to fish off the Folly Beach Pier. He wore simple khaki pants, a pressed polo shirt, and worn-in loafers. His posture was still ramrod straight, a habit forged in basic training that a lifetime couldn't break. He was respected. He was quiet. He was in every sense of the word home. But to one man, a man with a badge and a deeply ingrained suspicion, Arthur Bennett looked like a threat. And that man was about to turn a place of healing into a scene of humiliation. ICE Officer Kevin Maxwell wasn't responding to a specific tip or a warrant. He was conducting what his supervisor called proactive enforcement in a high-traffic area. In reality, he was driving his unmarked vehicle through neighborhoods he deemed suspicious, looking for targets. At 35, Maxwell was a zealot. He had been with ICE for 6 years, and in that time he had amassed a reputation for aggressive, borderline reckless stops. He saw potential immigration violations everywhere. He viewed the world in stark black and white citizens and aliens, legal and illegal, us and them. The nuance of a community, the tapestry of lives lived together, was lost on him. He saw a threat matrix. He had pulled into the Harborview Clinic's parking lot because he'd seen a landscaping crew of Hispanic men working near the entrance. He decided to sit and watch. He saw nothing. Then he saw Arthur Bennett walk out of the physical therapy wing to stretch his legs. At the same moment, the clinic's janitor, a man named Marco, came outside for a smoke break. Marco, a legal resident from El Salvador, had worked at the clinic for a decade and knew Arthur well. "Buenos dias, Señor Bennett. ¿Cómo está la pierna?" Marco asked with a friendly smile. Arthur, who had picked up conversational Spanish from his Puerto Rican comrades in the army, smiled back. "Un poco tiesa hoy, mi amigo. Getting old is hell." They shared a brief laugh. It was a simple human moment. Two men acquaintances sharing a pleasantry in the morning sun. But through the tinted windshield of Officer Maxwell's vehicle, this interaction was transformed. He saw a black man who in his mind shouldn't know Spanish conversing with a Hispanic man. His brain, wired for suspicion and fueled by prejudice, leaped to a conclusion. This was a coordinated exchange, something illicit. Smuggling, trafficking, false documents, it could be anything. He had his probable cause. He put his vehicle in park, clipped his radio to his tactical vest, and walked toward the clinic, his mind already convinced he had found a criminal hiding in plain sight. Do you think law enforcement officers should be allowed to conduct proactive patrols in sensitive locations like clinics without a warrant? Let us know your thoughts below. Officer Maxwell didn't bother checking in at the front desk. He strode past the receptionist, his eyes scanning the waiting area until they locked onto Arthur Bennett, who had just returned to his seat. Maxwell walked directly up to him, his shadow falling over the older man. His presence was immediately jarring in the quiet clinic. I need to see your identification, proof of citizenship. Arthur looked up, startled. He saw a young, intense man in a tactical vest with ice emblazoned across the chest. He was confused, but not intimidated. Decades of facing down real danger had left him with a reserve of calm. Excuse me, son. Is there a problem? I saw you outside. I need to see your papers. Now. Maxwell's tone was sharp, demanding. Arthur's confusion hardened into a slow-burning anger. Papers. The word felt alien, insulting. I'm a citizen of this country. I was born in this city. I'm here for a doctor's appointment. He reached for his wallet, his movements deliberate. He pulled out his South Carolina driver's license and his VA health card. He held them out. This is who I am. Arthur Bennett, United States Army retired. Maxwell barely glanced at them. These don't prove citizenship. I need a passport or a birth certificate. A birth certificate, Arthur said with a disbelieving laugh. I don't carry my birth certificate around with me. Who does? I'm 72 years old. At this point, the clinic's head nurse, Carol Peterson, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, noticed the confrontation. She walked over, her expression a mixture of concern and irritation. Is there an issue, officer? This is Mr. Bennett. He's been a patient here for years. Maxwell turned on her, his voice dripping with authority. Ma'am, this is a federal investigation. You need to step away or you'll be interfering. He turned back to Arthur. You're refusing to provide proof of status. I'm starting to think you're not who you say you are. The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Arthur, a man who had bled for his country, was being called a liar by a man half his age in a place he came to for care. Son Arthur said, his voice low and steady. You are making a very big mistake. That's it. You're coming with me. Maxwell declared, his patience gone. He reached for a pair of plastic zip-tie cuffs on his belt. The quiet hum of the waiting room evaporated. Conversations stopped. Every head turned. An elderly woman gasped. Arthur looked at the plastic cuffs and then back at Maxwell's face, a mask of grim determination. You're going to arrest me for what? For sitting in a clinic waiting room, failure to comply, suspicion of immigration violations. Maxwell's voice was loud now, performing for the small captive audience. He grabbed Arthur's arm. Arthur didn't resist physically, but he didn't make it easy either. He stood slowly, his bad leg aching in protest. Get your hands off me. I am not a criminal. Several people in the waiting room had already pulled out their cell phones. The red dots of recording lights blinked on one by one. A young man sitting with his mother angled his phone, making sure to get both Arthur and Maxwell in the frame. The audio was crystal clear. This is insane, a woman whispered off camera. He's arresting that old man, Nurse Carol, standing nearby, spoke up again, her voice shaking with rage. His VA card is right there. He's a veteran. What is wrong with you? Maxwell ignored her. He forced Arthur's arms behind his back. The zip tie pulled tight against the 72-year-old's wrinkled skin. Arthur winced in pain as the plastic bit into his wrists, aggravating his arthritis. But his voice, when he spoke, did not waver. He turned his head slightly, speaking directly to the phones now recording his humiliation. My name is Arthur Bennett. I am a veteran of the United States Army. I served in Vietnam. This officer is arresting me in my doctor's office for no reason. I want everyone to record this. Let everyone see this. He had spent a lifetime following orders, but he also knew an unlawful one when he heard it. He would comply, but he would not be silent. He would not be erased. He would make sure there was a record. Should a VA card be considered sufficient proof of citizenship to stop a detention like this? Drop your opinion in the comments. The 20-minute ride to the local ICE field office was silent. Arthur Bennett sat in the back of the vehicle, the zip-tie cuffs digging into his wrists, and committed every detail to memory, the time on the dashboard clock, the smug look on Maxwell's face in the rearview mirror, the crackle of the radio. He had been trained in reconnaissance in observing the enemy. The situation was different, but the skills were the same. This was no longer a misunderstanding. It was an operation, and he was gathering intelligence for the battle to come. When they arrived at the processing center, Maxwell marched him inside with a sense of triumph. He presented Arthur to his direct supervisor, David Chen, a veteran ICE agent in his late 50s who had seen it all. Chen was a by-the-book bureaucrat, a man who believed in procedures and paperwork, not gut feelings. "What do you have, Maxwell?" Chen asked, not looking up from a file on his desk. "Got a possible illegal, sir. Black male caught him consorting with a known foreign national. He's speaking fluent Spanish but can't produce a birth certificate. Refused to identify his status. I think he's using a fake VA card as a cover." Chen finally looked up. He saw a calm, dignified, elderly black man standing in plastic cuffs. He saw Maxwell puffed up with self-importance. An alarm bell honed by 30 years of federal service went off in his head. This felt wrong. Consorting with a known foreign national who the janitor at the Harborview Clinic. Is the janitor here illegally? Maxwell hesitated. "Well, no, I haven't run his papers yet, but the subject's behavior was highly suspicious." Chen sighed a deep, weary sound. He looked past Maxwell and addressed Arthur directly, his tone respectful. "Sir, what is your name and date of birth?" Arthur gave it to him, his voice even. "Arthur Bennett, August 12, 1953. Chen turned to his computer terminal and typed in the information. He hit enter. The system cross-referenced federal databases. FBI, DHS-DODVA. It took less than 5 seconds. David Chen stared at the computer screen. The color drained from his face. The profile that flashed up wasn't that of an undocumented immigrant. It was a decorated American hero, Bennett Arthur M. SGTUS, SG. Army retired. Service 1971 to 1991. Awards: Bronze Star Medal, Purple Heart, Army Commendation Medal. Chen's eyes scanned the file. Vietnam, the Tet Offensive. Honorable discharge. No criminal record. Not so much as a speeding ticket in the last 30 years. He looked from the screen to the elderly man in handcuffs, then to the smug officer who had arrested him. The supervisor's blood ran cold. Maxwell Chen said, his voice dangerously quiet. "What have you done?" At that exact moment, the office's public affairs officer burst out of her office, her phone in her hand, her face pale with panic. "Dave, we have a major problem. A video is going viral. It's us. It shows one of our officers arresting an elderly black man at the Harborview Clinic. The news outlets are already calling. They're saying we arrested a Vietnam vet. The dam had broken." The videos from the clinic uploaded by multiple witnesses were exploding across social media. The headlines were brutal and swift. "Ice cuffs. 72-year-old decorated war hero in clinic waiting room. I served in Vietnam. Final words of black veteran before ICE detention." The outrage was a tidal wave. Veterans of foreign wars and the American Legion issued furious condemnations. The ACLU and the NAACP announced they were investigating. the director of the Harborview Clinic, gave a tearful press conference calling Maxwell's actions a monstrous violation of a sacred space. Marco, the janitor, was surrounded by reporters, telling them through an interpreter, "Mr. Bennett is a good man. He is kind. He always asks about my family. This is a crime." The story was no longer about a questionable arrest. It was about a nation dishonoring one of its heroes. Within hours, one of the top civil rights law firms in the country had contacted Arthur Bennett, offering to take his case pro bono. The lawsuit they filed against the Department of Homeland Security IC and Officer Kevin Maxwell personally was a masterclass in legal outrage. It alleged a litany of violations: unlawful detention, false imprisonment violation of 4th and 14th Amendment rights, racial profiling, and the intentional infliction of emotional distress. It wasn't just about the arrest, it was about the system that allowed it to happen. The discovery process was devastating for the government. Arthur's lawyers subpoenaed Maxwell's records, and a disturbing pattern emerged. In his 6 years with the agency, Maxwell had initiated over 400 stops. Nearly 90% of those targeted were people of color. He had a dozen civilian complaints filed against him for overly aggressive tactics and baseless detentions. In every single case, his supervisor, the same one who encouraged proactive enforcement, had cleared him, typically with a note praising his high arrest numbers and proactive mindset. The lawyers deposed Nurse Carol, who testified that Maxwell had threatened her for simply trying to identify a patient. They deposed the other patients from the waiting room, whose cell phone videos provided an unshakable minute-by-minute account of the incident. They deposed Supervisor David Chen, who testified under oath that Maxwell's justification for the arrest speaking Spanish to a janitor was not and had never been a valid reason for a detention. The case was airtight. The government's own records painted a picture of a rogue officer enabled by a negligent system who was allowed to operate with impunity until he finally targeted the wrong person, a man with an unimpeachable record of service and a community willing to bear witness. Why do you think supervisors in law enforcement sometimes ignore repeated complaints against certain officers? Share your perspective. Faced with irrefutable video evidence, a mountain of damning internal records, and the public relations nightmare of putting a decorated Purple Heart recipient on the witness stand, the federal government did the only thing it could do: it surrendered. 10 months after the incident, they settled with Arthur Bennett for $6.1 million. The settlement was one of the largest of its kind for a wrongful detention case. The consequences for those involved were severe. Officer Kevin Maxwell was fired. His name was added to the National Decertification Index, ensuring he could never work in law enforcement in the United States again. His career built on suspicion and aggression was over at 36. His supervisor was demoted and transferred to a desk job in rural North Dakota. The scandal triggered a full-scale Department of Justice investigation into the Charleston ICE field office, which ultimately led to a nationwide policy change severely restricting warrantless enforcement actions in sensitive locations like hospitals, clinics, and places of worship. Arthur Bennett, a man who never sought the spotlight, found himself standing at a press conference, the cameras flashing, the microphones pushed toward his face. He didn't speak of anger or revenge. He spoke with a quiet, profound sorrow. "I served this country in a war," he said, his voice steady. "I believed I was fighting for a nation that valued freedom and justice. But the freedom I fought for abroad was denied to me right here at home in the place I go for medical care." This was never about the money. It was about making sure that what happened to me never happens to anyone else, whether they wore a uniform or not. His words hung in the air, a final, powerful testimony from a soldier who had been forced to fight one last battle for the soul of the country he loved. The cameras eventually left, the lawyers went home, and the world moved on to the next headline. But for Arthur, the silence that followed was heavy. The money couldn't erase the memory of the plastic cuffs tightening on his wrists or the sting of being treated like a foreigner in his own home. He still went to the Harborview Clinic twice a week, and the nurses and patients still greeted him with warmth. But something had changed. A place of healing had been tainted by a memory of violation. He had won the settlement, he had forced a change in policy, but he had lost a piece of the simple peace he had worked his entire life to secure. The shrapnel in his leg was a reminder of a war he understood. This new wound, this ache in his spirit, was a reminder of a conflict far more complicated, a battle against the shadows of prejudice that could accost a man anywhere at any time, even a hero in his own hometown. Does a monetary settlement ever truly equal justice in cases like this? What can we as a community do to better protect our elders and veterans from these kinds of profiling incidents? Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you believe these stories need to be told, please subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us hold power accountable.
Ma'am, I need proof of residency, now.
I'm a U.S. citizen. What legal authority are you detaining me under?
Your attitude just gave me probable cause. Step out of the vehicle.
You're violating my constitutional rights, and this camera is recording everything.
The hum of her car's air conditioning was a quiet, steady companion on an otherwise unremarkable Tuesday afternoon. Dr. Alana Bennett, 48 years old and a pharmacist with a reputation for meticulous care and a warm heart, sat patiently in the CVS drive-through lane in her comfortable sedan. The Texas sun beat down on the pavement, but inside her car it was cool and calm. She was waiting for a simple prescription refill, a moment of mundane routine in a life dedicated to the complex science of medicine. She could see the pharmacy tech through the window, moving with a familiar efficiency. In another 60 seconds, she'd have her medication and be on her way home. But she would never make it home on time. The first sign that her day was about to shatter into a million pieces was the black, unmarked SUV that pulled up at an aggressive angle, completely blocking her exit. It was a move of calculated intimidation. Before she could even process the maneuver, two men were emerging from the vehicle. They were dressed in dark tactical vests with the word ICE emblazoned in bold white letters across their chests. They moved with a purpose that made the back of Alana's neck prickle. The lead agent, a man in his early 30s with a buzz cut and a jaw set like concrete, strode directly to her driver's side window. The other agent, slightly older and with a more passive demeanor, hung back, creating a perimeter of authority. Alana's heart began to beat a frantic rhythm against her ribs, but 2 decades spent dealing with life-and-death prescriptions had forged an unshakable composure. She took a slow, deliberate breath and watched the lead agent approach. He didn't knock. He slapped the glass with his open palm, a sound like a gunshot in the quiet of her car. "Ma'am, roll down your window," he commanded, his voice muffled but clear in its hostility. Alana complied, the electric whir of the window seeming deafeningly loud. The dry, hot Texas air flooded the car. The agent leaned down, his face uncomfortably close. His name tag read Thorne. "I need to see your papers. Your proof of residency. Now." Alana looked from his hard, accusing eyes to his partner, who stood with his hand resting casually on the butt of his holstered firearm. This was not a request. It was a threat. Her mind, trained to analyze and assess, kicked into high gear. This was a seizure under the Fourth Amendment. She was being detained. "With all due respect, officer," she began, her voice even and professional, "may I ask what the legal basis is for this stop? I am a U.S. citizen, and I'm just waiting to pick up a prescription." Agent Thorne's eyes narrowed. He clearly wasn't accustomed to being questioned. He seemed to take her calm, articulate response not as the words of a law-abiding citizen, but as a challenge. "I'm not an officer, I'm a federal agent. And the legal basis is that I'm conducting an investigation. Now, are you going to show me your papers? Or are we going to do this the hard way?" The threat was no longer veiled. Alana knew that arguing with a man like this in a parking lot was a dangerous proposition. She made a calculated decision to comply while still asserting her rights. "I'm happy to provide you with my identification," she said, moving her hands slowly and deliberately. "I am reaching into my purse now for my wallet." She retrieved her Texas driver's license and, for good measure, her state-issued pharmacist license, both showing her full name photograph and a local address she'd lived at for 15 years. She handed them to Thorne. He snatched the licenses from her hand and glanced at them with dismissive contempt. "These don't prove you're a citizen," he scoffed. "They hand these out to anyone. They could be fakes." The absurdity of the statement was breathtaking. The state of Texas did not, in fact, hand out pharmacy licenses to anyone. It required years of advanced education, rigorous background checks, and federal DEA clearance. "Agent Thorne," Alana said, her patience wearing thin, but her voice remaining level. "That is my valid state-issued driver's license, and that is my professional license to practice pharmacy. My fingerprints are on file with both the state and the federal government. I assure you they are not fake." Her refusal to become flustered seemed to pour gasoline on the fire of his aggression. He saw her composure as defiance. He had expected fear, maybe tears. He got a calm, intelligent woman who knew her rights, and he couldn't stand it. "Your uncooperative attitude is giving me probable cause to detain you for further questioning." He declared, the legal term sounding ridiculous in the context of the CVS parking lot. From inside the pharmacy, the tech who had been preparing Alana's prescription was now standing frozen, watching the scene unfold with wide, horrified eyes. Another car had pulled into the lot, the driver slowing to a crawl to stare. The public spectacle was part of the humiliation. "Step out of the car, ma'am," Thorne ordered. Alana hesitated for a fraction of a second. "On what grounds?" she asked. "On the grounds that you are interfering with a federal investigation," he snapped back. "Now." Alana took one last look at the pharmacy, at the life that was normal just 3 minutes ago. Then, with a deep sense of dread and rising indignation, she unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out of her car. The moment she was clear of the vehicle, Thorne grabbed her arm, spun her around, and clicked the cold, heavy steel of handcuffs around her wrists. The ride to the processing center was a blur of silent, simmering rage. Thorne and his partner, Ramirez, said nothing, leaving Alana alone with her thoughts in the back of the SUV. The facility itself was exactly what one would expect, cold, sterile, and smelling faintly of industrial cleaner and human anxiety. The walls were a dull, institutional gray, the floors polished concrete. There was no warmth here, no humanity. This was a place designed to strip people of their identity and reduce them to a case number. Alana was handed over to 2 processing agents who went about their work with a practiced, detached indifference. She was now just another body to be processed. The humiliation continued. She was ordered to stand against a wall for a mugshot, the flash of the camera searing a moment of profound injustice into her memory. They took her fingerprints, rolling each one in black ink as if she were a common criminal. Then came the inventory of her personal belongings, her purse, her phone, her car keys. They took her simple gold wedding band, a symbol of her 22-year marriage, and dropped it into a small plastic baggie. They took her pharmacist license, the very document that represented decades of hard work and dedication, and cataloged it with the same indifference as a pack of gum. They saw the evidence of a stable professional life, a life of a model citizen, and it meant nothing to them. They were cogs in a machine, and the machine had decided she was an illegal immigrant. Alana sat on a hard plastic bench in a small holding cell, the metal cuffs now removed, but the feeling of them still ghosting around her wrists. The weight of the situation was immense, yet her mind remained clear. Shock had given way to a cold, crystalline anger. She wasn't a victim, she was a plaintiff. She began documenting everything in her mind, the agents' names, the time of the stop, every word that was said, the expressions on the faces of the processing agents. She was no longer just a pharmacist. She was the star witness in a federal case that hadn't been filed yet. She just had to endure the present. Hours crawled by. The initial adrenaline faded, replaced by a weary resolve. Finally, the door to the holding area opened. A man in a supervisor's uniform entered holding a manila file. He was older than the other agents, in his late 50s, with tired eyes that suggested he'd seen it all. His name tag read Miller. He looked at the paperwork, then at Alana, then back at the paperwork. A flicker of disbelief, then dawning horror, crossed his face. "Dr. Alana Bennett?" he asked, his voice cautious. Alana stood up. "Yes." Supervisor Miller's professional composure crumbled. "My God," he whispered, mostly to himself. He had seen the arrest report filed by Thorne citing an anonymous tip about a woman matching Alana's description involved in suspicious activity. But something about the listed profession, pharmacist, had flagged his attention. It was unusual. He ran her name through a secondary federal database, a step Thorne had been too arrogant to take. In less than 30 seconds, the truth had appeared on his screen in stark, undeniable clarity. Alana Bennett, born in Houston, Texas. A U.S. citizen with no criminal record, a top graduate of her university, and a respected member of the local medical community. In fact, he recognized her name. His own doctor had referred to her as the best pharmacist in the city. They hadn't just made a mistake. They had committed a catastrophic, indefensible violation of a citizen's constitutional rights. The liability was staggering. Miller realized instantly that Agent Thorne hadn't just arrested a citizen. He had potentially ended his own career and opened the agency up to a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. Supervisor Miller seemed to age a decade in the span of a few seconds. He rushed into the holding area, his face pale. "Dr. Bennett, I am Supervisor David Miller. There has been a terrible mistake. I am so sorry. You are being released immediately." He spoke quickly, a torrent of apologies and explanations pouring out of him. But Alana held up a hand, silencing him. The time for apologies was long past. Her shock and fear had been forged into something much harder, much more durable purpose. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Not until I have a printed copy of every single document related to my detainment. The initial anonymous tip, Agent Thorne's report, the processing and inventory forms, everything." Miller stared at her, recognizing the unshakable resolve in her eyes. This woman was not going to be placated by a few sorries. She was building a case. "Of course, Doctor. Absolutely. I'll get them for you right away." He scurried off, barking orders at his subordinates. An hour later, Alana walked out of the Federal Processing Center. She didn't look back. In her hand, she clutched a thick envelope of documents, the first volley in the war to come. She didn't go home. She went to her office, called her husband to tell him she was safe, and then sat at her desk. She opened her laptop and searched for the top civil rights law firm in Texas. The next morning, she wasn't just Dr. Alana Bennett, the trusted local pharmacist. She was the lead plaintiff in Bennett versus United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement. The lawsuit alleged unlawful seizure, false imprisonment, and a profound violation of her 4th and 14th Amendment rights. The fight had just begun. The case never should have gone to trial. Any sensible government lawyer would have looked at the facts, watched the crystal-clear security footage from the CVS, and immediately pushed for a settlement. But the U.S. Attorney's Office, perhaps pressured by the agency or simply underestimating Alana's resolve, decided to fight. It was a mistake that would cost them dearly. In the courtroom, the pharmacy's security video became the silent, unimpeachable star witness. Played for the jury on a large screen, it showed a calm, professional woman being terrorized by an agent who grew more aggressive with every polite question she asked. The jurors saw Alana hands always visible, complying with every order. They saw Agent Thorne, posture hostile, escalating the situation at every turn. But the trial's most dramatic moment came when Agent Thorne himself took the stand. Alana's lawyer, a sharp, methodical woman named Maria Sanchez, began her cross-examination gently. She had Thorne walk the jury through his training, his years of service. Then she moved in for the kill. "Agent Thorne, on what basis did you initiate the stop of my client?" "We had received an anonymous tip," Thorne said confidently. A tip about what specifically? Suspicious activity involving a woman matching her description in that area. What was the suspicious activity, Agent Thorne? Sanchez pressed. He shifted in his seat. The tip was vague. It just said suspicious. So you had no specific articulable facts that a crime was being committed, is that correct? Her uncooperative attitude gave me reasonable suspicion. Agent Thorne, Sanchez said, her voice dropping. Is it not true that asking what is the legal basis for this stop is a constitutional right, not a sign of being uncooperative? He had no answer. Then Sanchez produced his records. Over the past 2 years, 87% of Agent Thorne's anonymous tip stops involved Black or Hispanic citizens. Of those stops, less than 5% resulted in the discovery of an actual immigration violation. The pattern was undeniable. This wasn't law enforcement. It was a fishing expedition fueled by racial bias. The jury was out for less than 3 hours. When they returned, the foreman handed the verdict to the clerk. Alana sat beside her lawyer, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her expression unreadable. She had endured the depositions, the trial, the thinly veiled accusations from government lawyers. She had relived her humiliation 100 times. Now it came down to this. The clerk read the verdict, his voice echoing in the silent courtroom. On the count of unlawful seizure and false imprisonment, we the jury find in favor of the plaintiff, Dr. Alana Bennett. A quiet gasp went through the courtroom. We award damages in the amount of $8,300,000. The sum was stunning. It was a clear, unambiguous rebuke of not just one agent's actions, but of the system that allowed them to happen. In the aftermath, the consequences were swift. Agent Mark Thorne was fired. His conduct triggered a larger Department of Justice investigation into the practices of his entire field office. That investigation would later lead to sweeping federally mandated reforms, including new training on constitutional rights and implicit bias. The regional director was reassigned. The shockwaves were felt all the way up the chain of command. But for Alana, the victory was never about the money. In a press conference on the courthouse steps, she stood with her husband and her lawyer and announced her plans. This was never about me, she said, her voice steady and strong. This was about the principle that in the United States of America, your citizenship is not determined by the color of your skin. It is a birthright. She then announced that a significant portion of the settlement would be used to establish the Bennett Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to providing free legal aid to U.S. citizens who have had their rights violated by immigration authorities. Her ordeal had given her a new purpose. What happened to Dr. Alana Bennett was a profound injustice, but her story serves as a powerful reminder of a deeper truth. She had every advantage. She was educated, articulate, financially stable, and had the mental fortitude to endure the ordeal and see the fight through to the end. But what about the people who don't? What about the landscaper, the construction worker, the nanny who is a citizen but doesn't have the resources or the knowledge to fight back when confronted with the same illegal assertion of authority? They are the ones for whom Alana fought. Her case became a beacon, a story of how one person's refusal to be intimidated can expose the rot in a system and force it to reckon with its own failings. The security footage from that CVS parking lot is now a permanent part of training materials for federal law enforcement agencies across the country, a textbook example of what not to do, of how bias and ego can lead to a catastrophic violation of rights. The $8.3 million verdict wasn't just compensation. It was a warning shot, a message that accountability has a price tag. Alana returned to her life, to the pharmacy where her community trusted and respected her. The ordeal left a scar, a quiet trauma that would likely never fully fade. But it did not break her. Instead, it revealed a strength she never knew she possessed. Her victory was not just in the courtroom. It was in her unwavering dignity in the face of dehumanization. It was in her decision to take her pain and transform it into a shield for others. Her story underscores that the fight for civil rights isn't a historical event we read about in books. It's a daily, ongoing struggle waged in the most ordinary of places, like a pharmacy drive-thru on a sunny Tuesday afternoon. It's a fight that depends on the courage of ordinary people to stand up and demand that the promises of the Constitution apply to everyone equally. What part of Dr. Bennett's story resonated with you the most? Do you believe that large financial penalties are the most effective way to force systemic change in government agencies? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe these stories of justice are important and need to be told, please hit that subscribe button to support our channel.